Hi, welcome to this presentation on raising a well-supported workflow. I'm Dirk Stanley, and this is one of the presentations available at dirkstanley.com. For today, we have 5 quick objectives. Number 1, defining workflow. Just what is workflow? Number 2, what tools are commonly used to support a workflow? Number 3, construction of a sample workflow. Number 4, what are some common pitfalls people encounter when building workflow? And number 5, how do you avoid those common pitfalls? So let's get started. First, just what is workflow? Well, workflow definitions can vary somewhat, but there are two that really stand out. The first one comes from Google, which defines it as the sequence of industrial, administrative, or other processes through which a piece of work passes from initiation to completion. Another great definition comes from Charles Webster, who is very well known for workflow, and he defines it simply as workflow is a series of tasks consuming resources and achieving goals. In general, you can think of workflow as a series of tasks, and a task is really a discrete unit of work performed by a defined person or role. You can think of a way of writing a task as who, will or may, what. These are mandatory parts of the task. That's the basic unit of a task. And then there's some optional modifiers you can use to help clarify the task, such as when the person performs the task, where they perform it, why they perform it, or how they perform it. So if you think of this as the basic unit of workflow, then a workflow is just a series of tasks in the order required to achieve a desired goal or outcome. That seems to align very nicely with Charles Webster's definition. Also interesting to note is that there are some functional synonyms for workflow, including procedure, recipe, and source code. I particularly find it interesting that recipe is a synonym because recipes are written very clearly to make sure that you can eat when you're done. I think the food industry has a lot to teach other industries about workflow. Workflows then become the operational backbones of your organization. They ultimately support your business goals, which support your organizational vision and mission. And there are two common ways that people document both current and future state workflows. Probably the most common is with Visio diagrams, where people create flowcharts or swim lane diagrams. But another easy way of doing it is using well-written procedures, using that who, will, or may, what format. It's also interesting to note that Google Zeitgeist has seen a big uptick in use of the word workflow. Looks like somewhere around 1990, this suddenly became a very popular term in literature, suggesting its importance in modern business. Now, this is an operations pyramid that sort of helps frame where workflows fit in the operations of a typical organization. At the top of the operations pyramid is the organizational mission and vision, and at the very bottom is the organizational support. You'll see that the top part aligns the entire organization, and the bottom is the basic foundation of the organization. As we step our way through, you'll see where workflow sits. From organizational support, with this, the people will create concepts that then get put into words and definitions and terminology that are then combined to form templates, that are then combined to form documents, that are then combined to form workflows that ultimately support the goals and support the mission and vision of the organization. Now, typically informatics people concern themselves from 3 to 7, everything from the concepts and the definitions and the templates and the documents and the workflows. It's also interesting to note that electronic medical records typically involve the building of the documents and tools needed to support the workflows. If we look at those documents and tools in a little more detail, you can see that for workflow development, there are generally tools that are outside of the electronic medical record, such as plans, policies and procedures, guidelines, protocols, patient consents, interfaces, staff and patient education, schedules, committee charters, org charts, budgets, and job descriptions. And then there are those tools that are inside the electronic medical record, such as clinical documentation, labs, radiology, orders, order sets, clinical pathways, medical logic modules, clinical decision support, security groups, and reports and dashboards. And then spanning both of these categories is workflow technology. This is a new emerging technology that helps further refine workflows both inside and outside electronic medical records. So these tools that are used to build workflows, they're used together, and together they go into supporting a clinical workflow. You can almost think of it as raising the poles underneath a tent. And those tools, again, include things like project plans, policies and procedures, clinical documentation and forms, orders and order sets, guidelines, protocols, budgets, and more. Another way of thinking about it is with this pyramid. If you have goals, you want workflows to support your goals, and then you're going to want documents to support those workflows. And here they are again, almost like poles supporting a tent. So let's build a sample workflow. Let's start off with a desired concept. Let's say, for example, we decide that for reasons of physician satisfaction, we decide that we would like the CMIO to serve coffee to all physicians daily. So to do that, we're going to need a workflow. And so we start building the workflow using these tasks. Again, who, will or may what, with the optional modifiers when, how, where, and why. And if we remember that a workflow is a set of tasks arranged in order to achieve the desired outcome, then that brings us to building our future state workflow. And the first step is that all staff will give coffee orders to the CMIO, let's say by 8 a.m. And we figure it takes them about 5 minutes to fill out their forms, what kind of coffee they want. The next step then is that the CMIO will serve coffee to all the staff by 9 a.m. And that's going to take about 60 minutes to brew the coffee and deliver it to the staff. And finally, all staff will drink their coffee, and let's say we allow them 30 minutes. So it's important to note with each task, if we keep track of how much time it is, you can multiply the time by the salaries, and this gives you your cost estimate. So then we start to draft our implementation plan. So we'll start off our project by drafting our new workflow, which we've already done, project plan, which we're doing right here, and cost estimates, which we'll do in a moment. In February, we'll then secure our budget, our development team, and get preliminary approval for developing this new workflow. In March, we'll draft those documents and the policy needed to support the new workflow. In April, we'll test those documents and the policy for the new workflow. In May, we'll seek final approval of those documents and the policy that are needed to support the new workflow. In June, then, we'll educate the staff about the new workflow, and that's going out to all staff and also to the CMIO who's going to be serving the coffee. In July, we'll go live with the new workflow. We'll need to publish the calendars and the new policy. We'll need to update the forms in the forms catalog. And we'll even need to update a job description. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. And in August, we'll finally start to monitor the new workflow. Let's first look at the budget, our cost estimate. How much is it going to cost for this workflow? Well, first, coffee beans, let's say we estimate $5 a day times 365 days. That's roughly $18-25 a year. Then if we consider for about 50 physicians and their time filling out the forms and drinking coffee, let's say conservatively 30 minutes times roughly $100 an hour salary times 365 days times 50 docs, that turns out to be about $912,500. And then if we figure out the CMIO portion of that, and that's time collecting the forms, making the coffee, and serving it to the docs, Let's say that's conservatively 60 minutes times $100 an hour times 365 days. That ends up being about $45,625. So the total estimated cost for this workflow is almost $1 million per year. That's an important number. Before we go on, it's important to look for preliminary approval and make sure that you secure the budgeting. So then, let's start drafting. Let's assume we get that preliminary approval and we start drafting documents. So now we can draft our policy and procedure that we're going to need for this workflow. The policy, which is your standard, is basically that all staff will be served coffee by the CMIO by 9 a.m. daily according to the procedure outlined below. And the procedure is basically a reflection of that workflow. Number one, all staff will give coffee orders to the CMIO by 8 a.m. Number two, the CMIO will brew the coffee daily from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and deliver coffee to staff by 9 a.m. Finally, number three, all staff will get to enjoy their coffee over the next 30 minutes. Then to further support this workflow, we're going to need some coffee orders. And one might almost think of this as like a coffee menu or a formulary. This is what basically drug formularies are. They're sort of menus of drugs. So what are some things we might have on the menu? Well, we might just have regular coffee, and it comes in small, medium, and large sizes, and with the optional modifiers of milk and sugar. And maybe we also want lattes with the same sizes and optional modifiers, espressos, same sizes and optional modifiers, and finally frappuccinos. And then we might also need some order sets then, because we're going to want to get the orders from the physicians in the morning. So let's just say we put together a hospitalist morning coffee orders. And this allows the hospitalist then to check off how many regular coffees they want, how many lattes they want, what size it's going to be, and what optional modifiers they want. This allows us then to collect the orders for processing. We might also choose to have some documentation. Suppose we want to monitor this workflow. Well, we might actually need some kind of a tool that allows us to figure out every day of the week when was coffee served by. The policy says it's supposed to be served by 9 o'clock. So to make sure, we might need some documentation, and maybe we want some sort of a quality rating. And to make sure it's all accurate, we're going to want a signature for legal authentication and what time period this was documented in. We might also want some guidelines about coffee purchasing. Suppose we want to provide the CMIO some guidelines, and the guidelines might simply say staff prefer coffee made with Arabica beans. If those aren't available, then use Sumatra beans. And if no Sumatra beans are available, then use anything else that looks good. If there are any questions, that's what to call. Remember that guidelines are not policies. Guidelines are sort of recommendations, so they shouldn't be confused with policies. We might also need some staff schedules to make sure this workflow works. For the staff, we expect them to show up at 7:30. They have to arrive to work to start filling out their coffee orders. And at 9 o'clock, they need to be in the office to receive their coffee. And for the CMIO, there's a slightly different schedule. The CMIO has to arrive at 7:45 to collect the coffee orders. And then from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., they're going to be brewing the coffee and filling the orders. And at 9 a.m., deliver the coffee to the staff. It's important to note that schedules actually play a very important role in building workflows. We might also want some staff education then to support the workflow. And maybe for the staff part, it would say, welcome to Acme Hospital. To increase provider satisfaction, you're going to be served coffee by our CMIO by 9 a.m. daily. To do this, you're going to need to show up to work by 7:30 a.m., obtain your department's coffee order set, complete the order set, and give it to the CMIO at 7:45 a.m. Coffee will then be returned to you by 9 a.m. daily for you to drink within 30 minutes. Please remember to complete the coffee quality monitoring form before starting your day. If there are any questions, please feel free to call 555-1212. So it's important to note that this education refers to two tools, both the coffee order set and the coffee quality monitoring form. The education for the CMIO is even more intricate. This would say, "Welcome to Acme Hospital. To increase our staff satisfaction, you are going to be serving coffee to our staff by 9 a.m. daily. So to do this, you're going to need to show up to work by 7:45 a.m., collect the coffee order sets, start brewing the coffee, deliver to the departments by 9 a.m. But please also note that coffee purchases should be guided by the guidelines for coffee purchasing, and you will need to collect the coffee quality monitoring forms at the end of each week to determine your yearly bonus. If there are any questions, please feel free to call." We also then need to update the job description. The CMIO job description then needs to have coffee brewing as a responsibility. Some common pitfalls then that people encounter when they're building workflows is the first one is not developing these concepts in an organized, linear manner. You generally want to follow this pattern: conception, prioritization and seeking preliminary approval, planning, drafting, testing, final approval, education, publication, or what's sometimes called go live, and monitoring. Also, sometimes people don't develop all of the tools they need to adequately support the workflow. Sometimes people will just write a policy or they'll forget the project plan. And finally, this may be the biggest one, not securing the budget necessary to support the workflow. So make sure that you have a cost estimate and you secure that funding early before the preliminary approval. So ways to avoid these common pitfalls: number one, knowing how to develop well-supported workflows in a linear or organized manner, as we just mentioned, and also spending plenty of time in the planning process. Start by drafting your future state workflow. And once you have that, you can determine what supporting documents you're going to need to support these desired future state workflows. And you're going to want to align all those other documents to your future state workflow. Then you can draft your project plan and your budget estimates, and then secure your resources for budgeting your development team before seeking preliminary approval for starting your project. Thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful. If you want to reach me, you can find me on Twitter at Dirk Stanley or on my blog, dirkstanley.com.